All right. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming today. I'm gonna hide this little screen control. So I'm usually the host for the Tech Talks, the ECS Tech Talks, and this is our last one for today. And I guess I am the host, but I'm also the speaker. One of the things about arranging the Tech Talks is you can have yourself speak whenever you want. I don't abuse that too much, but this was in the theme of some of our recent talks. We've been talking about institutes and centers that are affiliated with EECS. So hopefully some of you were able to see some of those. We talked about CAS and NASC, and those are all recorded. If anybody wants to go back and see, those are on the Tech Talk webpage. This will be the last one for this quarter, and then we usually take a hiatus for the summer. And then usually, well, I guess it's becoming a tradition, I hope. In the fall, we'll have new faculty that show up, give talks, so that you can see what they're doing. But today, I'm going to talk about the AgAID Institute. This is a new institute that OSU got involved with. I'm Alan Fern. I was one of the people involved with this. I helped lead the proposal writing. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a professor in EECS. I've been here 17 years, and I have studied AI for the whole time, do a lot of research in AI on different topics. And this is really one of the topics I'm trying to get into more and more now. I see this as a long-term project. So the center is a 5-year center, but I'm hoping it's going to go well beyond that. Hopefully well beyond my retirement, if I ever retire. So let's get started. If anybody does have questions, feel free to just unmute and ask. Sometimes I can see chat, but often I'll miss it. So just ask questions, and there will also hopefully be time at the end for questions. So I will flip the screen here if I can. There we go. So brief outline. I'm going to first just give you a little idea about what AgAID is and what the vision and goals are for this institute. Then I'm going to, at a high level, talk about the AgAID research thrusts, the ones that are related to ag-oriented thrusts, and then AI-oriented thrusts. So they're cross-cutting, of course, but I'll divide them into those two groups. And then I'll give you some examples of current projects. So this will be a little more detail to give you really two main examples that we're working on now. And so that's how we'll proceed. And so what is AgAID? So some of you may be aware that the NSF, I think it's going to be in the 4th year now. They've been starting up these NSF AI research institutes. So there's a call every year. Lots of people apply. They're big institutes. They'll usually have themes, some number of themes, 4 themes, and people will apply for institutes in those themes. And we applied in the 2020-21 cycle for an ag-related theme, which actually was it's related to NIFA, the USDA. They actually worked with NSF to fund this particular institute, and we were lucky enough to win. There were 40 or so other proposals in the ag area, and we were one of the 2 that got accepted and funded. So we felt very, very lucky, but it was really through a lot of hard work and a great collaborative team, I think, we put together. So our team, it's funny because AgAID, after we came up with that acronym, I actually forgot what the original words were because it's just such a nice name. So it's just AgAID now. We don't spell it out. Somebody might, but I forget what it was. The ag hubs are Washington State University and University of California, Merced. These are schools that are pretty well established in digital ag already, and were really great to join this institute, and it's led by Washington State University. So they have a lot of great work up there in ag, and the AI Hub is composed mainly of these two universities, so us, Oregon State, and the University of Virginia. So we're working on different aspects of AI, but it's a very we cover most of AI topics between the two institutions. Then we also have some tech partners, IBM and Innovate Ag, which is a Washington company right now, and Carnegie Mellon. We've got a small effort there in robotics, along with our own robotics team. Outreach and education, we've got a community college and a university. These are largely served by Hispanic and Native American individuals. So this is a big part of our outreach. And our evaluator is Kansas State University. You have to have an external evaluator. So this is the main team. And I'm also hoping that over time, we're going to bring more and more people into the Institute, including OSU Ag. There's a lot of great work going on at OSU as well. And so we're continuing to try to bring in other people from OSU, not just AI folks. So this is a team. And the OSU team as it stands now, you might recognize some of these folks. Margaret gave a talk this quarter already. Wayne King's given a talk. Heather gave a talk. So you've heard a bunch of these people speak already, but there's 13 of us that went in on the original proposal, and I'm hoping this number is just going to grow, because basically it's an institute, and if we find somebody has an interesting project and they're working on it, they've got momentum, we are happy to bring them in as long as funds are available. So that's our team. The overview and rationale, the big question is, how can AI help agriculture secure the future in food production? Right? This is going to be a big deal as we move forward. The population, around the world is not going to go down. Maybe in isolated places it will go down, but worldwide it's not going to go down. There's changing climates, all sorts of fun, difficult, challenging problems that we have to be dealing with. And there's really a few things that we focused on in the proposal. One of them is water, right? Obviously, especially in the West, and really, I guess it's really prevalent everywhere. But water is going to be a major resource that we have to be much smarter about how we provision it and how we handle it. And that's something that you hear about in the news almost every year, especially when there's a drought season. So this is one place where AI might be able to help. How do we allocate water? How do we do better predictions about how much water we're going to have? Another thing that's you also hear about in the news is weather events. So a single weather event can cause tremendous havoc for farmers. They can lose 90% of their crops sometimes if they are not able to respond appropriately. And so this is another place where we're hoping to help farmers. Excuse me. With AI. And then finally, there's another thing you hear on the news is there's a labor shortage. And this is not a new thing at all. Both skilled and unskilled labor is really a challenge for farmers to acquire, especially in this seasonal game where the labor needs just skyrocket and then go down during the high productivity periods. So these are three of the things that really sort of shaped our thinking when we were writing this proposal and designing the center, the institute. because we're focused mostly in the Pacific Northwest, Merced's in the northern part, not quite northern, but it's closer to the Pacific Northwest than other agricultural parts of California. We're really focusing on specialty crops. So this is a very different type of agricultural institute than some of the other ones, which are focusing more on, you're talking about big corn fields and the non-specialty crops. Very different types of considerations. There's a huge diversity of specialty crops, and it's actually a big fraction of the workforce. They're high value crops, and there's irrigation involved almost always. So there's a lot of interesting challenges, and this is one place where our institute is distinguished among the agricultural institutes that are already there, that have an AI focus. So diversity crops are going to be the focus, and these are things like apples, cherries, grapes, nuts, things like that. So what should agricultural AI look like? What do we mean by that? And honestly, sometimes I don't even like to use the word AI. I'll use it in this talk, but really these, I like to talk about the specific problems that need to be addressed. And one of the problems that we have to address, so again, this is at a very high level, is there's a lot of modeling of complex systems that needs to be done in agriculture. So you might be trying to model the state of a plant. You might be trying to model the water, the moisture content in a field at any particular time, given the data you have. You might be trying to model, the weather. Like that's a basic thing that we like to model. So all kinds of crazy things that you'd like to model that have lots of uncertainty and lots of things that are measured and unmeasured. So that's one of the big things that we need to do. We also need to use those models to figure out what is the right human AI partnership. When it comes to either decision support or maybe it's robotic field work. This is a key part of our institute, in fact, and we have human-robot interaction experts, human-computer interaction experts for this specific purpose, because if you don't get this right, it really doesn't matter what the AI is. You have to get this partnership right. And along those lines, one of the big, the big selling points for our proposal, I think, was the focus from the start on adoptability. Right. So you might get this right, the human AI partnership. It might be a great product potentially, but if you don't have the right people involved to actually get it out there and get it used and get it known to the farmers, it's not going to be adopted. And so this is a key part, and we have partners that are specifically there to help us with this. So yeah, this is one of those slogan type slides. I won't spend too much time on it, but at the end of the day, the principles that we always try to keep in mind for the Institute is adopt, adapt, and amplify. And adopt is really the first principle, and we're really trying to go by this principle. I'll point it out in a few of the specific projects that we're working on, but we're almost always starting with either a system that's already in use that we're trying to improve, or actual studying the humans doing the thing that we're going to try to help them with, and figuring out and asking them what would be useful to you. We don't start by coding up the AI, and that's a critical principle that we always go back to when we're thinking about what projects to take on and how to proceed. Adaptability, we want our systems to be adaptable to all the changes that might come about and all the scales that we need to reason about. And then really this is all about amplifying human skills and reasoning at some level. It's unlikely for most of the problems that we look at that you're going to be replacing humans in any near term scenario that we see. So it's always about how do you increase their productivity? How do you take away the monotonous things that maybe are not high value jobs, but need to be done. So those are our principles, and we have a lot of stakeholder engagement. I'm not going to go through all of that in detail here, but what I want to do now is talk about our thrusts, the major research thrusts that are guiding our institute. We have a lot of people involved, and so we have to have some way of organizing the work. And right now we have three main agricultural oriented thrusts. These are sort of problem-centric thrusts. One is a water allocation intelligence, and I'll be going into each of these in just a little bit of detail, and then I'll have a deep dive for one problem in operations and one problem in intelligence. So we have water allocation intelligence, farm operations intelligence. This is, what are the decisions that need to be made to operate the farm, and then labor intelligence. What are the things, often physical, that need to be done on the farm? How can AI help there? And then AI, these are all cross-cutting AI research thrusts for each of these ag thrusts. Basically, AI, we break it down into, there's modeling of systems of knowns and unknowns. And what this means is sometimes these systems have some scientific knowledge associated with them, measurements, data, but there are also unknown aspects that are unmodeled through scientific principles that we might be able to, if we combine that with data and things that we know about science, we might be able to do better at modeling. And so this is a key part of our work. Then there's, once you have models, what do you do with them? You're generally going to want to make some decision. Otherwise, it's just a model just sitting there making predictions for no good purpose. And so understanding how do we give decision support to humans at all different levels, from public policy down to the farm manager deciding when to turn the knob on the water, the water system. That's something that we have to study. And then finally, going along with our adaptability, interactive human AI workflows is a key research problem. How do you actually go about the design of these workflows from the very beginning to, we think that this is a place where AI could help ag, to the final system that involves humans and some AI type system, maybe a robotic, maybe not, interacting. And so these are the main thrusts, and I'm going to go through each of these ag thrusts in a slide and just give you a high-level picture of them. So this is a different view of the thrust. So we've got water, we have our farm intelligence, operations intelligence, and then our labor intelligence. And I'll go through each of these. So our water intelligence, again, water allocation is a very complicated, there's a lot of politics involved, a lot of just decision making all the way down, from the policymakers to the actual farmer. But generally, one of the ways to think about the decision making is you've got your policy, and those are going to be informed by sort of expectations of how much water there's going to be. And this policy dictates what water districts get. There's often a water district notion of that there'll be many farms and farmers involved in a district, and then the district then decides how to allocate water among the individual farms and farmers. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into that I am just learning about. But it's very complicated, very political. You'll hear a lot about this on the news, of course. And where can AI help? Well, one of the big problems is actually just predicting what the water supply is going to be. How forecasting the water supply is amazingly complex, especially when you want to forecast it in particular places, and especially when you don't have full visibility into the water always. In fact, there's both human influences, and then obviously the just physical, just raw physics. But the human influences, especially, we don't always see exactly what they're doing. And so this is a big place where right now we have a team. OSU isn't working on this part yet. This is mostly the University of Virginia, but they're developing some digital twin type models. That's a term that they like to call a model that is sort of updated by real-time data. They're trying to develop models that model the human, water system combined that will make better forecasts for decision makers. And then they're also going to be working with policymakers, district level decision makers to figure out what is the decision support tools that would be most useful to them. So I'm not going to say any more about this because it's not really the research I'm involved in right now. But if anybody's particularly interested in this topic, I can point you to the point people on this. So farm operations intelligence, this is a place where OSU is centrally involved, and we're leading a couple of efforts here. The use cases that we've been thinking about, in the proposal and starting to think about now and work on are three of them, but there's obviously going to be more and more that come up as we learn more about the needs of farmers. But the first one is frost mitigation, and this is something you hear about in the fall or the spring when it's unusually cold at night, especially. This is a stressful period for farmers because they can lose their entire crop if they don't mitigate frost in some way. And there's a bunch of ways they can mitigate frost. For example, here they've got a whole bunch of candles in this field. I've never seen this live, but wow, it's pretty amazing what they have to do to save the crops. They also will use wind machines sometimes to invert the air when you have a warm layer above a cold layer. But this is a big deal. So how can AI help them here? And this is one of the specific examples that I'm going to talk about later. Deficit irrigation is a very important problem. Before getting into this project, I didn't realize how much of there's a lot of guesswork involved in irrigation. Let's just put it that way. And there's a lot of room, it seems, for more data-oriented principles. So if you look at, when we say deficit irrigation, what this means is that basically, if you look at how much water you apply and then the yield of the crop that you get, you're going to get a curve that has some diminishing returns. And this will differ depending on the crops and the field, the soil, lots of things. Whereas, so if you just look at, well, this isn't really reflecting that, but evapotranspiration, if you just look at, the evapotranspiration that, the water the plants actually use, it will usually go like this until it hits some threshold. It'll just be straight. And so what deficit irrigation is intending to do is, on one hand, you're just trying to save water, right? So there's a cost to the water that you have to use. And if there's diminishing returns, obviously you don't want to go out here somewhere because you'd be losing money, basically. But also with a lot of crops, crops like grapes, they literally like to make the grapes thirsty in some sense because it helps them produce sugar. It stresses them. So they're trying to stress the grapes at just the right time so that they get the wine that they want. And this, again, requires many years of experience, and there's a lot of guesswork involved. And so can we use AI to make this process more principled? And we have a project going on in this area as well. Harvest management, we haven't started working on this yet, but there's a lot of logistics, a lot of predictive techniques that could help in saying when you should harvest, where you should harvest. How many workers are you going to need? There's a lot of work that can be done there. It's a very stressful time of year for farmers, and any sort of support you can give them that helps their efficiency is going to be a useful thing. So we do have some good resources for this farm operations intelligence. So one is there's already this what's called AgWeatherNet. You know, type this into your browser. You can go there, get an account, and you can be on AgWeatherNet. A lot of farmers use this already. There's 12,000 subscribers, and I'll tell you a little bit more about one aspect of it. But it gives them information right now about the weather, about the frost mitigation information, and it's in use. And this is something that we're hoping to patch into with this project. So improve different things that are already being used and add new features. So that's great to have this in our hands. We also have a bunch of industry and other institutes that we can work with. Now, labor. So this is one of our other ag thrusts. We've got a few problems that we're looking at, a few use cases. One is tree shaking. So for some reason, I got to this point in my life without ever thinking about how nuts are harvested, or at least some nuts are harvested on trees. And they've got these giant tree shakers. They drive them up, grab onto the tree, and they shake it. And this is a skilled job because you don't want to shake too hard. It can damage the tree, and you want to shake just enough so that you get most of the fruit. And so it's a very is what is referred to as a skilled labor job, and it's very hard to find enough skilled labor these days. And so with AI, maybe we can produce a human-assisted tree shaker that will sort of take the best of somebody who might not be fully skilled at tree shaking and make them about as good as a skilled tree shaker. That's our initial goal. Blossom thinning. This is a major task that can help improve the crop yields and productivity, but it's a major time sink as far as labor goes. You could do as much of this as you had resources for, but they just don't have enough experienced people to do it. And then tree pruning. This is another major labor task that is done in the off seasons, and it's very important because it has a lot to do with how productive you're going to be next season. So I'll be talking about the pruning specific project in a little bit. And we have some good resources to study labor intelligence as well. One of them is this Center for Precision and Automated Agricultural Systems, and we have access to a demo farm, which is in Prosser, Washington. And this is going to be a great resource. I've got a little bit more on this later. Actually, I'll just bring that slide up now. This is going to be a great resource because it's already used. They reach 3,000 plus people every year. People come in for tutorials, and they're constantly testing new technologies. They've got educational programs for students, for workers. So workers can get certificates in different technologies. And so this is a great place for us to have access to workers, managers that we can interview, talk to, and a place for actually testing out technology as well. So it's a great resource that we have access to, and we've already been doing some work on this test farm, and we're putting more and more sensors in, including this year where we just got a grant to put in a whole bunch of sensors to sense plant stress and water, soil water content in a big patch of land, grapevines. So it's exciting to have access to that. So the AI research thrust, I don't want to go too much into these. I'd rather talk about some of the specific projects, but very quick, I said basically you've got to model things that are noisy and have a lot of unknowns. You've got to make decisions with those models, and you've got to figure out how do you work with humans in the best way. And really, when you think about AI, this is the fancy diagram that you create for proposals. It's actually pretty reflective of where we're still going, I think. So the details are not important, but there's really three different challenges that this diagram is addressing: the data challenge, uncertainty challenge, and human challenge. And I just wanted to briefly go through what those are, what I see at least as the main challenges. And so the data challenge, you hear a lot about big data and deep learning and data sets that have billions of web pages and models that have billions of parameters. Well, ag is a very different story in a lot of ways. Our data is typically going to be quite limited. So this sort of hits home when so recently we've been working on predicting when the buds are going to break in the spring for grapes. Well, you've got 30 years of data. It sounds like a lot of data, but really it's just 30 events, right? So you have to get used to working with smaller amounts of data than what you often hear about in the big data era, and that's actually raises some interesting challenges that I actually like, because we don't necessarily have to compete with the big data people that we can't compete with anymore as an academic institution. So another thing that you find with this data is it's often irregularly sampled in time and space, rather than having nice laboratory measurements or nice images that have all the pixels and perfectly sampled. The data is often highly correlated. This causes issues for lots of different types of models and analyses. The data is also non-stationary. The weather is non-stationary in a sense, and fields and plants change over time. So this is a lot of challenges that make this problem very interesting from an AI research point of view. Uncertainty. Well, this is one of the big challenges for AI in general, being able to reliably quantify the uncertainty of predictions and models and decisions that we're making. And let's just say that this, you want uncertainty estimation for trustworthiness, safety, and decision support. So when you tell a farmer that their crop is at risk because of the temperature tonight, they'd probably like to have some notion of how certain you are of that before they spend $100,000 mitigating frost that night. So finally, well, this should be the human challenge. Sorry, there's humans involved, and the interesting thing about this project is there's a lot of different populations, from policymakers to the actual workers on the field, and each technology is going to be designed for usually one of those populations, and you have to work with them very differently. They have very different skills and prior knowledge and backgrounds. Lots of different types of hardware, and the problems are very different. From real-time robotic pruning of a tree to longer-term decision support about, well, how should we plan out our crops over the next 5 years? What should we be thinking about planting? All right, so that's all sort of high-level stuff about the Institute. Now I'm going to show you a couple of examples of projects. And to start out, I'll just say these are the things that OSU is currently working on. This list is growing, but the project started just late 2021, so we're really in the very early stages. Started at a point, for example, where it was hard to hire new students for the project because it's just the way academia goes. New students come in the fall. So we'll be ramping up even more this coming year. But we already have a bunch of efforts ongoing. One is frost mitigation. I'll tell you about that in a moment. Another is deficit irrigation. Raviv Reich is working on this problem. A lot of, so you have sensors in the field. Can you predict what the soil water content's going to be given an irrigation schedule, the weather that you can measure, and also that all relates to plant stress. There's a lot of weather data that we are dealing with, and Wenking Wang and Prasad Tadapalli are working on problems such as imputation of missing data when you have these weather networks, and anomaly detection to detect problems in these weather networks. Nut harvesting is something that we're starting to work on. We're sort of in the initial formative study stages where we're actually talking with the people who are going to be working these machines. Fruit harvesting, Joe Davidson and Cindy Grimm. I'll show you, well, I won't show you any of this today. I'll show you some of their other robotic work, but this is very interesting work. They're working on apple picking, very hard problem. I did a lot of apple picking as a kid, and I would have loved to have a robot to do that instead of me. And also we're starting to, Northwest Farms donated us a vertical grow wall, and we're going to be growing strawberries this summer to work on picking of strawberries. It tends to be, that's the bottleneck, it seems, when you talk about vertical growing. You actually have to eventually harvest those things. Pruning and thinning. This is a big problem, and I'll show you an example of this in a moment. And then seed inspection is another problem that we just started getting involved in. And this is using computer vision to help or even replace people who have to sit there with microscopes and watch thousands of seeds go by, looking for ones that don't belong, because when you're buying seed, it has to have a certain purity level. And people literally sit there with microscopes watching these seeds go by. So I'm going to tell you about these two problems today with the time I have left. So this is a problem that a few of us are working on. Myself, Prasad Tadapalli, we're the main people working on this right now. Minsuk Kong, he's also starting to work on this now on the user interface side of things. But as I said before, frost mitigation, you'll hear about this on the news when there's a cold patch in the spring or the fall. And you just heard about one of these in late April. There was that cold streak in late April caused a lot of havoc. And the way that when it gets too cold, to prevent the plants from freezing, they have to do measures such as what you're seeing here. And this can cost a lot. I put hundreds of thousands of dollars here, but I have heard numbers up to $1 million for frost mitigation. So it's a big deal. It's a big decision to do this, but if you don't do it, you're going to lose your crop. And so there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of risk involved, and so it's a big deal. And so how can we help farmers? Well, the way that these plants, I'm going to focus on grapes, but plants, these types of plants that we're dealing with, they have the same characteristics. Grapevines have a property called cold hardiness, and this is a plot. It's an abstract plot of, this is the temperature at this time of the year of when 50% of the buds will die if the temperature gets to, in this case, -5 degrees. And you see, as the grapevine is in the dormancy period, it starts to get more cold hardy. And then eventually, when it gets into deacclimation, it will become less cold hardy. And this is when eventually over here the buds are going to break, and then there's no returning. And so there's a lot of hormonal processes going on in the plants here that are not fully understood, but they can measure what these are. And so what the farmers need to do is they need to know what this value is. Like for my field, my plants, what is the cold hardiness today? And what's the weather report say today? And that's how they're going to have to determine whether to do these sorts of frost mitigation measures. So it's very important to have a good prediction. And you can measure cold hardiness, because you might ask, why don't they just go out and measure it? Well, it requires some expensive equipment to go measure it. And we're lucky enough to be working with scientists who have measured cold hardiness for 30 years. But they have to use a special device like that they created on their own. This is a tray. They can go out, get a bunch of buds from the field, a diverse set of buds from around the field, put the buds in these little chambers. And these chambers are connected to some detectors that can detect when energy is released due to freezing, because that's what happens when something freezes. Some energy will be released. You can actually detect that, and so they can measure what fraction of the buds break, and they put them in this controlled freezer and decrease the temperature. And then, for example, on this day, they did this measurement, and 50% of the buds broke at minus 20 something, 25 something degrees. So they can measure it, but it's expensive, requires specialized equipment, and not most people can't do this. But so what they've done, this is something that exists in AgWeatherNet, the Spring Frost Program. They've tried to create models of cold hardiness for different cultivars of grapes, and also they're working on these for apples and cherries. And they've developed these models. The scientists have developed these models using their knowledge of plants and also some data to tune some parameters. But they're relatively simple models, I would say. But that's what's available on AgWeatherNet currently that farmers can look at. What are the predictions of those models? And what we're working on now is to try to improve those models by using neural networks, or we could use some other machine learning, but we're focusing on neural networks right now for predicting the cold hardiness. And some possible advantages are, well, with a more complex model than what's being used now, maybe you could improve accuracy. Maybe it'll be worse, but maybe it will improve. It's also much easier to include other types of weather features. Right now, the models only work with temperature, like the daily mean temperature. That's literally all they use, because when you're creating a scientific model, it's hard to put a lot of random information in that might be related, but you don't exactly know how. The other thing we can do with machine learning is we can also try to train a system so that it weighs costs differently. Like frost mitigation, there are different types of errors. And one type of error, you'll cause somebody to do mitigation when they didn't really need to. The other type, you'll cause them to not do mitigation when they should have. And that's probably an error that you want to avoid. And then once you have a machine learning model set up like this, it's easy to adapt it to other crops, right? If you have data for those crops. So rather than spending another 2 years designing a scientific-based model. So what data do we have? Well, I told you about this measurement tray. There's been scientists that we work with that have gone out approximately every 2 weeks. I mean, I don't know what the overall average would be, but that was the intention, to try to get data every 2 weeks, because they have to go to all these fields to get the data. And then for different cultivars, we have different amounts of data. Like you might have 5 seasons of data or 30 seasons of data, depending on the cultivar and field. So the data that we're working with right now, just to get our wheels turning, is this data set of Merlot vines, which we have 22 seasons of, and we chose this because it's the one we had the most clean data. Well, it's not clean data, but the most data that we could use, the most seasons that we could actually use. So we have 22 seasons. We use 20 of them to train models and 22 to test, although leave one season out, validation, experiments as well. So what I'm going to do is show you what the science model does at an abstract level, and then show you how we sort of turn that into a neural network type model. Just to give you a little idea about how this works. So what the science model does, so this is observation one, this is a day's worth of temperature data. The scientific model only uses the temperature data because they think of the plant as sort of the hormones are sort of keeping track of some measure of the degree days, they call it. Which are controlled somehow by temperature. And so here's the temperature for a day, and the temperature for the next day, temperature for the next day. And what the scientists do is, this is a feature extractor, we'll say. All they extract from this information is the mean temperature on that day. So you get these 3 days here, and the time series keeps going. But this mean is going to go into this model. And what this encoder does, I'm calling it the encoder, the Ferguson encoder, this should be an E. This is keeping track of something that you can think of as a plant, the state of a plant. So what state is the plant in after seeing this temperature on this day? And then this state goes into the model along with the temperature for the next day and puts the plant into a new state. And I'm not going to go into the details of what the state means to them, but it keeps track of sort of the overall temperature accumulation, and it keeps track of whether they think it's an endodormancy or ecodormancy and things like that. So that would require a full talk in itself. And then from that state, they can then turn that into a prediction of the cold hardiness. And again, I'm not going to go through the details of that, but this is how the scientific model was formed. They think of it in terms of, okay, we need to maintain the state of the plant over time and then make predictions from that state. So what do we do as machine learning folks? Well, it's kind of funny because it's kind of embarrassing sometimes, because it's almost like we just kind of give up on trying to think about what might cause the state of the plant, how the state changes. We just give up on that and we say, well, let's just replace that with a neural network, right? So we're kind of lazy. We don't want to think too hard. We say, hey, the state of the plant must have something to do with the mean temperature. And so we're going to let the neural network figure out what that is each day. And so this is going to be the same neural network with the same parameters. It's just every day it gets the state from the previous day that the network output. This will just be a vector of numbers. We might not even understand what they mean. We usually don't understand what they mean. And then this temperature comes in and it outputs a new vector of numbers that you might think of as the state of the plant. And then from that vector of numbers, that state, we then have the neural network predict what we want it to. And this is the cold hardiness, okay? So that's how our neural network works. Now, once you do this, it's really nice because, well, our neural network doesn't care. It's very easy to now put in a whole bunch of weather features, not just temperature, because as I said, we're not going to try to think about how humidity affects the state of the plant. We're just going to let the neural network try to figure that out. So we have these 12 weather features that we're going to input. Not only that, we can also try to predict other things if we want, very easily without having to do a lot of thinking. So if we have data about when the buds break, for example, we can have this neural network also predict when the buds break. And the interesting thing about this is when you predict more and more things about a plant that you can observe, you might think that maybe the state representation is better reflecting that plant. We can't say that. And then maybe even, and this is something we haven't started working on, maybe that could help inform scientists about how the plant actually works, right? So this is where some of our research may go. So we can do that. Now, how do we train the models? Well, the interesting thing here is we have temperature data or weather data for every day of the year, right? These are from our weather stations. And we use the closest weather station to the site that we're dealing with. But we only have ground truth for cold hardiness on some days, right? They only did this every 2 weeks. So we're going to train our model to make predictions every day, but it's only going to get feedback on some of the days, like every 2 weeks. And so it wasn't really clear going into this whether the model would get something that looks even reasonable on the days you didn't train it on, or, because it's only trained on some days. So we really weren't sure what would happen here. And it turns out, I'll show you a graph in a moment, that we can do pretty well. So our neural network, in terms of mean squared error, beats the scientific model pretty well. And of course, this is a small evaluation. We trained on 20 years of preceding data and tested on 2 years of data. Bud break prediction is actually pretty accurate. We're usually within 1 or 2 days. This is just showing you the predictions of our model. We actually predict 10% damage, 90% damage, and 50% damage. And this is the dark blue line is the measured LTEs, and the red line is our predicted one. So qualitatively, they look pretty good. And I'll skip over this because we're getting low on time. This was actually kind of fun. So this was this season, and we're running our bud break prediction model. So this model predicts a probability that the bud is broken either on this day or before. So it should eventually go up to 1 and say, probability 1 after the buds have broken. But this is what was happening here was it looked like it was about ready to jump up and predict the bud was going to break. Like this is the 50% probability line. Then you remember that cold spell in April we had? It popped down. Then we were waiting for it to pop up again. And this is actually when the bud broke on this day, the 50% line. So that, you might say we got lucky, but as I said, the model usually is within 1 or 2 days when you use this 50% line for the threshold. So that was pretty fun to see the sort of live science. We were ready to call up Marcus Keller, our collaborator, on the phone and ask him if the buds broke or not. So very quickly, I'm going to show you a little bit of the work that Cindy Grimm and Joe Davidson are doing for pruning. And I'm just going to say pruning is super hard. I mean, you've got this mess of branches. You have to have a robot look at them, decide how to prune. Like that's not exactly a science. Like where do you want to prune? That varies from tree to tree. You also have to get the robot to actually do the pruning, which is hard to do. So I'll show you the system that they're working with. This is at the test farm. So they use step sensing to get the tree canopy. Then they use some computer vision to get the tree canopy in digital form. And then they do things like this. So this is in the lab, but if they have a model of where the trees are, or where the branches are, this is in the lab. They're showing you that they can sort of kind of do the pruning. I don't recommend doing a lot of pointing around these experiments for obvious reasons. They can prune. And the thing is, you saw that was kind of using no physical feedback. They have a new system now that uses physical feedback. So it will. They don't want to do that. So it gets close. They don't want to do that because you can damage things. And so they're using a neural network trained with images to actually get close, and then they go into a different control mode that's based on force sensing, and then they do their. So this isn't going to do the snipping because it's in the lab, but what they did is they then trained a neural network, and in simulation, I'm going to try to move to the next slide. Here's what they did last. I think it was January they did this. They went to Prosser, slower than a human, but they're starting to get some success in the real world now. So I think that's how I'm going to end today. We're pretty much out of time. What I did not get to on that is Heather Knight's work, which is really nice work. It's the formative studies here, trying to figure out how we're actually going to have these pruning robots and humans working together. And one thing that's been interesting from their initial findings is they've talked to a lot of farmers and pruners, and the managers would be happy if the robots could do 70% of the work and have the humans clean up. So that's sort of an initial goal, you could say. And with that, I think I will just end. And if there are any questions, I can take them if you can stay longer. But thanks for attending. So are there any questions? Usually I ask questions, but I'm not going to ask myself questions because I just talked for an hour almost.
Well, Alan, I'll ask a question.
Good.
Yeah, I'd like to hear, I know you're pretty early in this project. Do you have any quick words to say about your connection with the educational institutions? There was a mention of boot camps and other certificate efforts too, to share what you learn out there.
Yeah, they already, those institutions already have a lot of certificate programs. And so far what we've been doing in terms of working with them is we've actually been using them as a source of people that we can interview to learn about the types of people that we're going to be working with, designing technology for. So Margaret Burnett, you've heard about her Gender Mag project. She's working on what's called socioeconomic mag now for this project, and developing a whole set of procedures for designing technology that take the socioeconomic aspects into account. This summer we're sponsoring a whole bunch of undergraduate research students. Some of those are from some of these institutions as well. And so we'll see, over time, I suspect, the hope is that we'll be offering actual content for certificates, whether we can do that in 5 years. I mean, it takes a while for technology to get mature enough, but that's sort of the goal, to work with these partners and educate. But right now, I think the main interface will be through getting their undergraduates into our labs, mostly in the summer. That's when we do this. We have a robust REU part of this project, and we also work with 4-H and high school students. Those are already established programs, and so we have boot camps for them. Lots of fun things.
That's great. Looks like a very exciting project.
It is. I hope it's going to live on long past these 5 years. So yeah, so we're past time. I think we can end now. But yeah, thanks everybody for coming, and stay tuned. We'll have more tech talks in the fall. Thanks everybody.